What's up, YouTube? It's Nerdy, and welcome back to the Transmissions Draft League. I am back and somehow alive, although the thing that was dead was actually my computer, not me. Yeah, I'm bringing you the power rankings. So if you guys are in the Discord, then you know that the power rankings have already been revealed. But I figured I would go a little bit more in depth and hopefully something that you can listen to a little bit more passively rather than reading through all my nitty gritty notes. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. So with this video, we're going to go over both my own personal scores for everybody and how I rank them, as well as I got rankings from 5 other coaches around the league to take an average for a collective ranking. And yeah, of course, I also made a tier list. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. First up on our list, I have the Dream Park Duo Blades. This team I gave a 5.6 out of 10 for. The biggest thing that I have about this team is basically just that there are good individual Pokemon here, but it's not necessarily a coherent team, and the good Pokemon that are on the team are not necessarily game breakers that I generally think of. So for the most part, this team is really just going to be fighting uphill, as it's missing the two things that are, in my opinion, can sway the game the most. You may not have like game breakers off the bat, but if you have a strategy, you can put other teams in a blender. Or if you don't have a cohesive strategy, sometimes you just have a bigger hammer to hit your opponent over the head with. And this team doesn't really feel like it has either of them. Regieleki, Maushold, and Zapdos are all really great Pokemon. I don't really believe in any other Pokemon on this team, at least not to be a game breaker. Hatterene can do that sometimes, but it really does require Psychic Terrain in order to do so, and there's no way to set it up here on this team. Garganacl can also do so, but is a lot more predictable in how it does that, as well as Garganacl is also very exploitable in how passive it can be. It also really struggles against anything holding the Covert Cloak, which is definitely very sad for this team. So overall, I do think that this team can catch a couple of teams daydreaming, so to speak, but overall I do think that this team will be the underdog in most of their matchups. Next up, I have the Booming Swamperts. I gave this team a 5.7 out of 10, and similar to the last team we just looked at, this team does have a couple of the same issues. However, I do think that this team does have some of the star power that the previous team was missing. And that's kind of just between Brute Bonnet and Heatran. I do think that these two Pokemon can kind of win a game all by themselves, and they have the ability to really break open a game that I don't think every Pokemon can. Obviously with Brute Bonnet, it's a little bit of they can be an offensive, annoying support Pokemon to deal with things like Spore and Rage Powder. But it does also provide a ton of bulk to this team. Heatran is very similar, although it can also provide a lot of damage as well as an excellent typing. I do believe that both of these Pokemon are pretty terror reliant, especially with how big of a target these Pokemon have on their back. And as for strategy, this team does have a couple. There is Prankster Sun on this team, which a few Pokemon do benefit from. There is also Tailwind on this team. And of course there is Trick Room on this team, as it is a little bit on the slower side. Overall, though, we're going to get into some really powerful teams, and so I do think that this team will definitely get a couple of wins, and they definitely deserve to get a couple of wins with good play and, of course, just overall breaking Pokemon. But overall, I think more experienced players using a good team will have an easier time handling this team than another team that has a really good strategy that pairs these powerful Pokemon together more seamlessly. Next up, we have the Season 4 Sweepers. I am actually moving them up in a tier, so when we go over the my rankings, I do have a tier list for you all to reference when we get there. But first, let's go ahead and get into the Season 4 Sweepers. First up, this kind of sucks. Obviously, this team picked Archuludon round 1. However, by the time it came back to them in round 2, both Politoed and Pelipper were gone, meaning that there was no instantaneous rain to be added. Now, that's not a death sentence for any rain team by any means, but it does mean that rain is harder to do. Archuludon is also thankfully not entirely reliant on rain, so there is also that. Overall, I think that there are excellent Pokemon on this team that also pair pretty well together. I love this 3 Pokemon core of Archuludon, Sinistcha, Iron Hands. I definitely think that this can bully around a lot of teams. I also think that Klefki is underrated. I used it in my Season 2 team, and yeah, big fan. I also think that there are a couple of frauds on this team. I think Frostmoth is way too Terra reliant. If you can get a good game out of it, that is good because it's only 4 points. And then Tornadus Therian is a certified fraud, although if there's any place for it to succeed, it is on a rain team. Hopefully you can get some good Bleak Wind Storms out of this Pokemon. There is some synergy, as you can tell, on this team, and there is definitely some game breakers. Archuludon, Iron Hands, and even Basculegion are certainly capable of that. But I do think that this team missed out on some of the high ends that they could get. Definitely a step down from JKG's previous Archuludon team. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I think that this team actually ditched rain a little too hard. Obviously, that there is still quite a bit of a commitment to rain here. I think maybe this team could have benefited from a more consistent rain prankster setting Pokemon. Something like Murkrow could have been a great investment here as well. But overall, I think this team is still going to be pretty solid, and I do think that they will be dangerous. So definitely don't just give them a pass if you are playing against them. Next up, I have got the Sunset Rose Meowstics. They got a 6.5 out of 10 for me, and this is a classic Perish Trap team here, and it's very unafraid of the fact that it is a Perish Trap team. This team basically doesn't do anything else. Araquanid is kind of a nice trick room mode, and there is a lot of support here to hopefully extend the game so that your definitely lower threshold damage can keep up with other teams. That being said, I do think that Perish Trap does suffer from the week-by-week schedule that we have, where teams can prepare solely for your strategy and don't have to prepare for the field, which is where Perish Trap tends to thrive. I do think that this team can still get some stuff done. They have options, and of course Dragonite is an excellent piece. I do think that the combination of Dragonite and Screamtail can definitely complicate matchups, especially where you don't want to be Perish Trap reliant. But I do think that this team, like I said, will be fighting uphill. But yeah, I think with good play, definitely going to get some wins. It's dangerous like Perish Trap always is, but I do think that they will suffer from the fact that everybody will always be prepared for exactly what they want to do. Next up, we have the Calgary Flareons. This is yet another step up in the tiers, as they are getting a 7.6 out of 10. And it's at this point that I need to now mention that basically every team from now on is a team that I see as a playoff team. Now keep in mind, we only have 6 playoff spots. So the fact that I have 8 playoff teams means that there is going to be a couple of teams that definitely get shorted this season. That being said, I do think that this is a spot to shout out Celadon. This is an excellent draft. I'm actually really happy with this. There's a couple of odd picks here, and I will mention one of them is, of course, Rotom. Complete fraud of a Pokemon. Sorry, I don't ever see Rotom doing well in draft, and I think that that's going to continue here. Ironically, I think the one that is best is Rotom Frost, but only in a scenario where you have snow. This is, of course, a rain team, so not going to get the chance to click blizzards over and over again. That being said, still a okay addition to the team, although I do think Sandy Shocks kind of did what you wanted out of this particular set of skills. The other thing that I wanted to mention about teams this season is I actually don't think that there's that big of a spread of power this season. I don't necessarily think that anybody won the draft this time around. Normally there's like one team where we can all agree this is the best team. I don't think we have that this season. And I also think that the actual ceiling has been lowered a little bit because everybody is so closely grouped with how powerful they are. But yeah, overall, I do think that this team is very killer. I'll show you the rest of the team. Hisuian, Goodra, and Moltres Galar in particular deserve a shout out because I do think that they're going to be game-breaking Pokemon for only 12 points. On a team that already contains Urshifu Rapid Strike, and they're all going to be enabled by Grimmsnarl, it's going to be awesome. The one thing that I will say about this team is that it's very predictable, and not necessarily in a bad way. The thing is that all of these Pokemon have a very clear best set that they can run. Moltres will probably want to run Nasty Plot, Goodra will probably want to run Iron Defense, etc. That being said, it's at least different in that the way that you beat these Pokemon is not the same way. The things that counter Urshifu don't necessarily beat Goodra, so it might be predictable, but you're not beating it with the same thing, which I do think helps Celadon out a lot. We've already seen some good things as a part of Week 1 has wrapped up by this point, and I do think that this is going to be Celadon's best chance at making playoffs this season. Next up, I got the Infernal Infernapes. I got them at a 7.7 out of 10. First off, this looks very familiar. All of these Pokemon look very familiar. Ironically, this team looks like kind of a blend of our Season 1 from TDL and Season 3 team of TDL. So we have the core of Annihilate, Primarina, and a Rillaboom Pokemon. On my version of this team, it was Thwackey. They spent the extra points on Rillaboom. And then, of course, you'll recognize the duo of Thundurus and Clefairy from our Season 3 team that did make it to the Grand Finals. So, off the bat, I gotta say, I like them for copying me because the greatest form of flattery is, of course, imitation. So, hopefully, we did right there. Overall, I think this team is pretty solid. I do think that they were talking up Ambipom a little bit too much. It's a great value for 2 points. I don't think it's going to be the absolute game-breaking Pokemon that they have touted it as so far. Should be solid though. Ceruledge, in my opinion, is a little bit of a fraud Pokemon. I do think that it can be solid, and there is good support around it, so hopefully it will change my mind. But yeah, Ceruledge, in my opinion, is kind of a fraud. I could see, by the way, a very interesting lead or even game plan strategy of Weakness Policy and Weak Armor Ceruledge, along with Aqua Jet Primarina to activate those abilities and getting Sarah Ledge off to the races, but that is pretty predictable and is very weak to interruption. So we'll see how that works. Next up, tied with the Infernal Infernames at 7.7, I've got the New York Poke Rangers. This team has a lot going for it, especially in these top 4 picks. I think if you took it just based off the strength of these top 4, probably in the discussion for the best team. In my opinion, it's not necessarily the best team, which is why they're a little bit down. But this team does have decent support Pokemon, and although I'm not a huge fan of almost any Pokemon after Staraptor, Persian Alola's good support. Rhyperior can work against Trick Room teams. Defiant and Competitive are good to have on a team that does have a very Intimidate weak Ogerpon. Other than that, I think this team is kind of just slapping it together and riding off of the power of Flittermane and Heartflame. This team will do well because those two Pokemon are absolutely incredible. And like I said before, if it were just off of the strength of those two Pokemon, probably the best team in the league, but that's not how draft works. So they will have a bit of a power deficit against a couple of teams, but I don't think that they will struggle too much. Next up, we have the Cretaceous Draco Meteors. We got one final step up in the tiers. They are getting an 8.2 out of 10. And before we start, you can see that the 5 Pokemon in front of you are very expensive, and I can confirm this team is very, very top heavy. It's not really something that I expect from Dale when he's drafting teams, but still very interesting. The one thing I will say about this team is that this team reminds me of Gouging Fire teams from older Regulation F formats. The teams of the past looked like this basically exactly, where the Steel type was King Gambit, the Fire type was usually Gouging Fire, and then you would have some combination of Chenpao, Ogerpon, Rillaboom, Amoonguss. And then a really strong special attacker. And it was basically just a team centered around the synergy of really powerful physical attacks and then a special attacker to cover your weaknesses. And that's kind of what this is. Raging Bolt is your really powerful special attacker that doesn't really fit with the physical attacking core that you drafted, but is still the best special attacker available, so will probably perform just fine. That being said, all of these Pokemon here are on Fraud Watch. Barraskewda already had a good game, which is good. Rhydon also had a good matchup. Now keep in mind some of these Pokemon are 2 points, so you're kind of not expecting them to do much. The fact that you can get anything out of them is good. I just don't believe in any of these Pokemon. They are ranked really low for a reason, and yeah, hopefully Dale can get good stuff out of them, but they are on Fraud Watch. Next up, I have the Bit Breakers, tied with the Draco Meteors at 8.2 out of 10. Somehow this team has 10 extra points to spend, so they spent 10 fewer points than every other team, and they still got a top 5 team. Of course, we know the power of Ursaluna and Cresselia, but this team also managed to get a very bulky fire and grass core. Crawdon doesn't really count as a part of that core, as this is more of an offensive Trick Room Pokemon. My only problem with Crawdon is I don't really know wherever you're going to use that over Ursaluna. Maybe against an Orthworm that didn't get drafted. But yeah. Ninetales is also a really nice addition. It does kind of allow you a way to play outside of Trick Room. I think that this team is going to be extremely Trick Room reliant, but Ninetales at least gives you something else to do. And the other thing is that Scraggy is an absolute steal for 2 points. It's probably my favorite pick of the entire draft. If you remember, I did have Scraggy on my own Ursaluna draft plan, so good job there. It's a great pairing. Um, Braviary Sui is also a very scary Pokemon for only 4 points, so very happy to see that Pokemon be drafted. Overall, I think this team is pretty good. I do also think that they're probably going to end up spending the rest of those 10 points. The biggest fraud to me is probably Luxray. I wouldn't be surprised if they upgrade this Pokemon and potentially even Decidueye Hisui in the future. But otherwise, this team is very solid and will go far. Um, Overall, just a tough team to handle. Classic Trick Room with Ursaluna, tough to beat. Next up, I have got the Los Angeles Charge Beams at an 8.5 out of 10. And then the biggest thing about this team and the next two is that I don't really have a preference between which one of these is number one. I think you can make a reasonable case for all of them being number one. Um, as you can tell by me reading this team first, I like it the least of the ones I have tied for first. Spoilers. Um, but yeah, that being said, I think this team is very scary, but it falls short in a couple of places. First of all, this team is very special attack heavy, as it probably should be with Chiyu on the team. Um, but I also think that this team is also missing out on its strongest mode. Obviously, with Blood Moon, Ursaluna, and Torkoal, this team probably should be a Trick Room team. I don't actually see this as a Trick Room team. I think that the ways of getting Trick Room up with Mimikyu and Reuniclus are a little bit lacking and not going to be as consistent. But this team also has access to Tailwind and of course just Chiyu Hyper Offense, as well as some Sun elements with Lilia and Hisui. Um, that being said, I do think that this team is going to be less consistent, but has a higher threshold for what they can actually do when they are allowed to get their strategies off. I do have a couple of warnings for Fraud Watch. Mimikyu is on my Fraud Watch. It's been drafted multiple times to Trick Room teams and just hasn't performed very well. Hopefully this can change for this season, but I think with the Disguise nerf, Mimikyu is just not what it used to be, and its stats really let it down. Also, Elekid, Quillfish, and Grookey, I don't really think that they're going to do anything. Grookey's best matchup is actually against my team, and I don't think that it's good enough for that, so we'll see how Grookey does. But all of these Pokemon just have really bad stats, and although you're probably just using them for the role of Follow Me, Intimidate, and Grassy Terrain, I don't think that they're good enough in those roles. Finally, one more little gripe. Reuniclus is my favorite Pokemon, and how dare you steal it from me. Moving on. We've actually got my team. We got the Manchester Beavers, also at an 8.5 out of 10. Before I go any further, I do want to say that this is, of course, very biased. I trust myself a lot to make teams, and I do believe that I draft really good teams. That being said, this is probably the best one that I've ever drafted, if not very close to the best one that I've ever drafted. Like I said, I don't think we necessarily won the draft, as I think we're pretty close in power level to the other two teams that I have tied for first. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that this is the best team in the league right now. First of all, Indeedee and Iron Crown is an excellent pairing and demands a ton of attention, especially with Tailwind support from Talonflame. I like Talonflame because it's a little bit more of an offensive Tailwind setter, and it's also so fast that despite it not actually having Prankster, it can be so fast that it might as well have Prankster. It also gets a very good support moveset that we can make use of. And yeah, Priority Brave Bird does go pretty hard in a lot of matchups, so hopefully we'll see that pop off. Hariyama is obviously a really good change-up to Psychic Terrain, as it does deal with a lot of the things that Psychic Terrain hates to deal with. Yeah, overall, I think Hariyama is an absolute steal for 10 points. I'm really happy with this pick. I was really waffling back and forth on what fighting type I wanted. Initially, it was Komodo, then I started leaning towards Iron Hands, and then I started thinking about something like Slitherwing. I'm glad that we landed on Hariyama, as it does also open up an option for Trick Room. We also have Ogrepon Cornerstone on this team. We've seen how great this Pokemon is in basically a vacuum where it doesn't have a team built for it. I wouldn't say that this team is tailor-made for Cornerstone, but it's certainly a great fit for it. Cornerstone fits really well on Trick Room, but it also does really well under Tailwind, and consistent Rock type damage is hard to beat, and Cornerstone is the best at that. We also have Grafaiai, in my opinion, the best unburdened Pokemon, unless you are specifically wanting the power of Sneasler. I prefer the versatility and support of Grafaiai because we can also make use of Prankster on this Pokemon. I do think that Grafaiai will get a lot of value from both being an Unburden and a Prankster Pokemon for us. We also have Squawkabilly. This is just going to be a final Gamut bot. No need to explain that any further. Duosion is our sad replacement for Duosion. It is still just as strong as Duosion. The only thing we miss out on is, of course, the bulk, but hopefully it should do everything we want it to do still. We also have Alchemy here. Alchemy is a little bit win more, but we have such strong Pokemon that put on a lot of pressure, but also create a ton of space for each other that I do think we're going to get opportunities to get Decorates off. And yeah, when a team can get a Decorate off, especially on Pokemon as strong as Ogerpon, Hariyama, or Iron Crown, the game can end pretty much instantaneously. So looking forward to making use of that. Finally, we grabbed Haxorus. There is a couple of instances where Rivalry will be useful, such as Ursulina Blood Moon and the Genies, but also just looking forward to what Haxorus can do. It's very strong, is on the faster side, obviously just below base 100, and does have a couple of sets that are going to be very useful for us. Yeah, that is the Season 4 Bewares. I'm very excited to use this team. As I've mentioned a couple of times now, I played a ton of Psychic Terrain and Hard Trick Room in tournaments before, so I have experience with basically every single one of these Pokemon, and I'm very excited to see what I can do with these Pokemon in draft. And I think it's not a stretch to say that the rest of the league should be put on notice and should be very afraid of what we can do with these Pokemon. Last up, I have the 10-star team. The defending champion, Tensor, has got Golden Go Tailwind, and as a Golden Go Tailwind enjoyer myself, this is a very good team. It kind of plays itself. Incineroar and Azumarill are obviously really great additions. Rotom is a fraud. Clodsire is a fraud. Electabuzz is a really good Pokemon. Cleaver is a fraud. Frostlass is really good, and Dedenne is a fraud. So overall, a couple of fraud picks in here, but a very solid team that I think makes a ton of space for a Pokemon that is absolutely imperative you don't give any space whatsoever. I know I was pretty negative about at least half of this team, but overall I do think that this team is very, very scary. Even just outside of Golden Go, because this team creates so much space, Azumarill is more of a threat than it usually is. So although I don't really expect Tensor to get much out of Rotom, Clodsire, Cleavor, or Dedenne, there is potentially corner case scenarios where they get something done. I just don't think that they're going to be worth the points that were spent on them. Frostlass was a great pick though. Overall, I think this team is very scary. Although it's pretty straightforward, there is a lot of opportunity for creativity here. And I think this team should be feared. Maybe of the top 3 teams, not necessarily the one that stands out as the most terrifying, as I do see this kind of everywhere on the rankings. But I think if you know ball, you know that this team is very scary, and you should definitely respect it. And of course, it's coached by a former grand champion, so make sure that you put this team on notice. But with that being said, here is the tier list that I have made. Of course, there's nobody in the 9.1 or above category. We have a very fairly balanced tier list this time around. Everybody kind of hovering in the same point range. So yeah, very tight scores here, which I think makes for a very interesting competitive season. That being said, I was not the only person to score everybody, so without further ado, let's go over the collective rankings. In last place with an average score of 5.8, it is the Dream Park Duo Blades. Staying at the bottom of the collective rankings. Next up, we have the Booming Swamperts, and this is where we see how close every team actually is. Booming Swamperts have a 6.17. Their scores range very wildly. They got as high as an 8, but as low as a 4. Very wide-ranging scores on this team. The Sunset Rose Meowsticks were next, so actually dropped below the Sweepers on this ranking. Their rankings also stayed pretty consistent, as high as a 7.5, as low as a 5. A team to be respected, which I think everybody is aware of, but definitely not the most terrifying, as they are very predictable. Next up is the Sweepers. They got an average score of 6.43. Again, not the biggest spread of scores here. Highest score being a 7.7, lowest being a 6.4. Next up, we have the Cretaceous Draco Meteors. Ended up with an average score of 7.61. This also varied pretty wildly. We got a 6.3 as their lowest score and as high as an 8.25. So I agree that this team is pretty solid. I did have them ranked really highly. The fact that they're all the way down at 8 also doesn't surprise me. Like I said when I introduced my tier list, I do think that there's 8 teams from this point up that could be playoff teams, and the Draco Meteors are in this mix. So however you want to arrange these 8 teams, I think is correct. But yeah, in my opinion, a little bit underrated for them. Next up, we have the Calgary Flareons. Very wide range, even wider range than the previously mentioned. As high as an 8.5, but as low as a 5.5. Definitely underrated in my opinion. That 5.5 dragged this down quite a bit. Otherwise, they'd be in contention for like the number 1 team. Without this score, I think they actually do jump up to 3rd place in rankings if you take out that 5.5. So kind of a shame there. I also don't think that it's crazy to rank them in this range, as of course I had them in this range. But yeah, like I said, props to Celadon. This is a great team, and I think everybody's, except for one person, is putting that on notice. Next up is the 10-star team. They got an average of 7.75, and sorry if I didn't mention Celadon got an average of 7.73, so this is how close these rankings actually are. We are 0.02 difference between these 2 teams. Like I said, this is a very tight season. Not a wide range of scores for this team. We got as high as an 8.5 and as low as a 7, so pretty tight grouping on that. Next up is my team, the Manchester Bewares. We got a 7.78, so again, only a 0.03 jump in score. But similar news here, just a little bit better average. We got as low as a 7 and as high as an 8.5. Next up is the Infernal Infernapes at 4th place. They got an average of 7.85. They were scored as low as a 7.25 and as high as a 8.4. So again, pretty tight grouping on that. In 3rd place, we had the New York Poke Rangers. They got an average of 7.87. They had as high as an 8.25 and as low as a 7. So really tight grouping there. Interestingly, they didn't get any scores as high as some of the other teams that below them. The Infernape's, Beware's, and 10-star team all got as high as an 8.5, so the Poke Rangers just had a better average. Next up is the Bit Breakers. They are sitting at an average score of 8.24, as high as a 9 on one of these scores, and as low as an 8, so again, really tight grouping on that. And then finally, in first place, we have the LA Charge Beams. They had an average score of 8.69, a range of a 9.5 all the way down to an 8.3. Again, tight groupings on that. I do think that that's definitely an overrating. I think that the top 2 scores should probably be brought down to be more in line with the rest of what I believe is the top 8. So a bit of an overrating on those 2 teams. Definitely a 9.5 is way too high for the Charge Beams in my opinion. They're a very good team, but they're inconsistent. So I don't think that they can be scored that highly. But obviously, very good team. I do have them tied for first. But it is a tied for first, not a ahead by 0.46, or sorry, 0.45 in the rankings, when the difference in previous tiers was less than a 0.1. So definitely a little bit of a disagreement with the collective list, but that is what we have. So the collective list would look something like this. We have the and then we'd have Infernal Infernapes, the Bewares, we'd have the 10-star team, have the Flareons, and then we'd have the Season 4 Sweepers, and then we'd also have the and that this is what the collective tier list would look like. Interesting how this all actually shook up. I do find it interesting how the collective list influences the way that a lot of people look at this. I do think that a couple of people are on the money about what their actual rankings are, and I think that the season will actually play out in a very similar way as, like I said, we're all very tightly grouped here, and it's all just going to come down to week by week and matchups. So yeah, that's all I have for you for this Power Rankings video. Hopefully you did enjoy my rambling mess. That is all I have for you, and good luck to everybody who's playing this season. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.